So you just finished another anime, enjoyed or absolutely hated your time with it, and now have lots of thoughts to share with our great community. However, there's still a very important and ever-recurring decision to make, giving the anime its final and concise verdict, most likely in the form of some kind of score. Now, some of you don't actually care about anime scores nor about scoring them yourselves, and that's fine. I'm not here to convince you of anything. This video is mostly for people who take scoring Chinese cartoons at least semi-seriously and want to potentially improve their own scoring system. Now, before we get to stars, numbers or other ways to rate anime, let's take a look at why most of us even like to score things in the first place and why review scores are such a big deal for many. But first, the negatives. Now, the main criticism people have when it comes to scores is the reduction of a complex piece of art to, more often than not, a single number, which is not only rather disrespectful to all the people involved, but it also fails to capture all the different parts and important details that make up an anime. This is very apparent, for example, in the popular numbered rating systems. Imagine putting years of hard work into a product just to find out some famous critic equates it to a 6 out of 10 on Twitter, without any further explanation. And their fans just buy it as a valid opinion with weight that influences them whether or not they're gonna watch it themselves. Which leads me to my second point. Since such simple scores are used everywhere, people are now used to them and just expect them whenever they're searching for new anime. That means a sizable chunk of casual watchers will merely look at the rating for their decision making and mostly ignore the actual arguments found in the text or even video accompanying it. And lastly, since these people care so much about it, critics will feel pressured to conform to the scores those people will expect to feel validated, rather than express their own unique rating.
That's why my final rating for this is a broken marriage out of 10.
Even if they may not actually think this is the right one for this particular anime, leading to scores losing even more of their meaning. In addition to that, review aggregate sites force reviewers into certain scales like a Metacritic percentage, for example, so then it gets even more confusing. And I'm not here to argue against those reasons why some might even call for a complete abolition of ratings. But the thing is, they're not going anywhere anytime soon, or maybe ever. They're just too popular and ingrained in everybody's minds at this point. So let's look at some positives and why many, myself included, still like to use them. Firstly, a simple rating serves as the ultimate summary of one's thoughts about an anime. This makes it easy for the author to get his or her opinion across in the most broken down and efficient way possible, while the viewer quickly understands whether the author liked or disliked the anime in question. Secondly, scores allow us to order things. Even if you don't care nor use them, if I were to pick out 2 different anime from your watch list, you most likely prefer one over the other, and scores are an easy way to enforce this. Ordering also makes sorting possible, so you can quickly reason about how much you like an anime in relation to another, which may come in handy for top lists or when you need a quick recommendation for others, or even your future self. And last but not least, let's not forget that the whole process of labeling things like that is pretty fun. This is even backed by science and studied quite rigorously in the fields of psychology and sociology. Categorization and classification allow humans to organize things, objects and ideas that exist around them and simplify their understanding of the world. So basically Twitter. Alright, so now that we've established that there might be a case to make in favor of rating an anime, let's actually look at all the popular rating systems that are used around the world today. Is there a best one? Let's find out. There are 4 components to a rating system with discrete levels. The lowest value, the highest value, the steps in between or how far the levels are apart, and the unit that is used. The amount of levels is also a part of this, though it may be calculated from the first 3 components. For now, I think it's a good idea to start with the rating system with the lowest amount of discrete values and work our way up from there, as components such as steps or units used are really just decoration if you think about it. Even big movie reviewers like Jeremy Jahns, who use words or moods, kind of admit that even then they can and will be ordered by the audience anyway. There's also ProJared, a video game reviewer, who uses a unique rating system, but it's more of a humorous take on it, so really, it's all about levels in my opinion. For obvious reasons, 2 is the lowest amount of levels that makes sense, so you can actually differentiate 2 different anime. The unit that is most likely used here is probably thumb up, thumb down. Interestingly enough, while animals keep evolving into crabs for some reason, Rating systems seem to keep evolving into a binary one, as seen first with YouTube as the most prominent example, who ditched a 5-star rating system in favor of the 2 thumbs. The same thing happened to Netflix a few years ago, which seems to get more customer engagement that way. Though a few months ago, Netflix changed it to a 3-level system with 1 thumb down, 1 up, or even 2 up, so users can get better suggestions. But when do you actually want to use a binary system? For one, it's as simple as it can get. If you even have slightly positive or negative feelings toward an anime, you know where to put it. Not much decision fatigue involved. The problem arises when you're completely on the fence, of course, which can happen more often than you think. Especially in today's world where so many anime, movies or whatever seem to come from the very same factory. In this situation, adding another level might solve this issue. This level being a can't decide, it's okay I guess, or I feel indifferent about it tier, right in the middle between good and bad. This gives you the ability to still decide in these pesky situations where you're really unsure about an anime. This particular system is actually used in my anime list reviews nowadays, and I feel like this system may be the best one in terms of the famous 80-20 rule. That being said, if you're like me and watch a ton of stuff, then these classes may fill up quickly with several hundreds of different series, movies and so on. In this case, you might want to upgrade to a system with more differentiation ability. As you probably have noticed, I skipped right to 5 levels instead of 4. The 2 main reasons being 1, it makes more sense to give each side the same amount of fine-tuning in my opinion, and 2, as a consequence, no one really uses such a system. Even famous movie reviewers like Roger Ebert, that used a 4-star system, actually utilized 8 levels, since they made use of half-stars. So what makes one want to use 5 levels like you know from Amazon? Well, it certainly allows for more fine-grained opinions that can be visualized. Gone are the times where 2 anime exist in the same league when they really shouldn't. Overall, this is a pretty flexible system that synergizes well with more detailed views as well. There's also a variant of this using the American school grading system, you know, the one that uses the letters A, B, C, D, not E, and F, where A is the best and F the worst one. They're also weighted a bit differently and have varying ranges, with an F being applicable even to anime that would still be considered above average in other rating systems. Anyway, if this really was the one system to rule them all, and 5 levels were the ceiling,
Hey Ron. Hey Billy.
then we wouldn't have a bunch more to look at. Let's find out why many people and sites choose even more complex ones. Now, the 4-star system is pretty much synonymous with Roger Ebert's system. If you don't know who this guy is, then you probably haven't been too deep into live-action movies yet, as he was probably the most famous movie critic back in the day. Anyway, this system most often uses stars to represent its levels, of which there are 8 in total, since it utilizes half-steps or stars in this case. As you can probably guess, the main reason to use this over the previous ones is that it lends itself to more fine-grained score tuning, so to say, which will be a common advantage of the systems yet to be introduced, so I'll stop mentioning it. One thing to keep in mind, however, with even-numbered systems like this one, is that there isn't a clear middle ground anymore. So if you're really on the fence about something, good luck trying to rate it. The only way to fix this is to introduce custom definitions for each level, like defining that 2 stars or 4 total means average, for example. But this introduces a new problem. Then your system becomes unbalanced, since there are now more good than bad levels. So in a lot of these cases, there's a trade-off to make. Anyway, if you'd like to have even more levels at your disposal, we can go even further beyond. The 10-point system is arguably the most popular system in use today, and there are many theories as to why we feel such an attraction to the amount of 10. Now, I said this specifically in a weird way and don't call it just number, because really we could represent 10 apples, for example, as 1010 in binary, or as an A in hexadecimal. They're all just different numeral systems, you know, describing an amount with some symbol. Some argue that we use 10 different digit symbols because of our evolution that just happened to give us 10 fingers, which might help explain our fondness of 10 and why we like to rate things based on the 10-point system. Sites that use it, for example, include MyAnimeList as the most prominent one in the anime community and IMDb as the normie one. At this point, most of you should be satisfied and have already found the ideal amount of levels for you. But I know for a fact that there's still someone out there seeking more, and for you I'll have one more system to show. The last rating system I want to talk about is the 100 level system. Or the percentage system, if you will, as this is the unit most often associated with it. More values at your disposal, but also more difficult to make decisions. Because let's be real, could you really explain to me where the difference lies between a 62 and 63% show? Plus, if you're like me and need every class to be represented by at least one anime, then you'd have to have at least 100 different anime under your belt anyway. So yeah, this system is used by the likes of IGN, hidden as a 10-point with decimal system, by certain anime sites such as AnySearch, and even by most other big entertainment media sites where rating is a thing, at least when showing the ratings to the viewer. All that being said, I wouldn't go any higher than this. Trying to fit an anime in one of 100 categories is as hard as it already is, so any more than that and it gets outright comical. So these were the most popular rating systems used today, not only in anime but in general as well. Of course, like pretty much always, there may be some outliers that use a 20-point scale or a 7-word scale like you see often on one of these online tests or studies. But overall, I believe I've covered all the essential ones. So far, we've mostly discussed the amount of levels that rating systems usually have, which is the most important part in my opinion anyway. Still, there are some other considerations that I'd like to address now. First, steps or increments. These can be used to decorate your system, but it doesn't really affect anything other than the visual representation of it. Then there's the question whether or not a 0 should be included. When I was demonstrating the different systems, I implicitly chose a 1 as the starting point whenever I didn't mention anything else. But some may argue that there are some anime so bad that they don't deserve anything, or in number terms a 0. A similar reason why you would want to include the 0 is if you wanted to include theoretical nothingness, which would naturally get a 0. This has a potent implication. In even rating systems, this would actually provide you with a center again. Think of a 10-point system for example. Without a 0, both the mean and the median would equate to 5.5, which is of course impossible to designate to an entry within the boundaries of your standard 10-point scale that uses the same 1-point steps in between the discrete levels. With a 0, however, you'll get a 5 in both calculations, which is something you can assign to anime. Strictly speaking, this would turn it into an 11-point system. However, in the theoretical case, you could still use a 10-point system provided by some site and just think that a 0 is included. Of course, nothing would ever get this score since it would mean that nothing exists, so this is a bit of a hack. Mathematicians might refer to this as axioms. Just introduce something that cannot be proven anyway, but helps to solve other stuff more comfortably. And whether or not you'd need a perfect middle in the first place is of course completely up to you anyway. Yet another question that might arise at some point is what you should do whenever an anime falls right in between two levels, as in, is this anime a 6 or a 7 out of 10? In your mind it feels like a 6.5, but of course that doesn't exist in your current situation. The simple way out would just be switching to more levels, but that's just treating the symptoms, not solving the issue. Like what happens in the unlikely but possible scenario where an anime falls right between 62 and 63%. Upgrade to 1000 levels now? There must be a better way. The alternative being that you just have to decide where the anime should fit after all. So the question becomes, round up or round down? You could apply maths for once in your life and always round up. Or you think, well, a 6.5 has definitely already surpassed a 6, but it has yet to reach a 7, so I'll give it a 6, or something like that. In any case, do whatever feels right to you. Now, some people, like infamous That Anime Snob, seem to straight up value some genres more than others, meaning that if an anime primarily fits in a specific genre, then it's incredibly unlikely that it can go higher or lower than its associated score. And then there's one thing remaining. Does your highest score equate to perfect? Does it mean your best anime has no flaws? What does a 10 out of 10 mean exactly? Perhaps you'd say that a perfect 10 is a masterpiece. But what is a masterpiece then? Does a masterpiece have to be perfect or flawless? If we take it literally, is it just a piece of work made by one or more masters or senseis, so to say? This is also something that has annoyed me for the better half of the last decade. Fortunately, for me at least, I have found something satisfactory that I will reveal later. I think this might even be the hardest decision to make when designing one's own rating system. So good luck, mate. So, we've now looked at all the essential rating systems and some considerations to make when creating the architecture of your own one. Well, what's the best one then? Don't worry, I actually have an answer for this rather than the boring old "it depends." And my answer is, the best rating system is every system that is consistent. Yep, that's the most important part. Who cares what symbols you use or how many distinct values there are? The most important thing is to be consistent. That and actually using the system. How many users have you seen on my anime list that merely use a fraction of the whole scale? You know, the ones where 7 is average and 5 is the worst anime of all time. They might be consistent with their way of rating, though it does feel weird and it also screws up the public ranking, of course, making them borderline unusable. The main reason that leads to the latter, in my view, is not being honest with yourself. I remember when I started out, I've also had 10 numbers at my disposal back then, but only actually used 7 through 10. I thought, if I were even able to complete an anime, then it must be a good one, right? There's no way in hell I would actually waste my time, ever. Over the years, however, my taste has changed and matured, and now looking back, I realize just how much trash I have actually consumed all this time.
Fuck out of here.
And the last thing that makes up a good rating system, in my opinion, is it being as complex as it needs to be, but still as simple as it can be. If you try to explain your system to someone else and it just doesn't make any sort of sense to them whatsoever, you might want to go back to the drawing board. After all, giving out scores isn't just a private thing in most cases. It actually serves as one of the sources for the public to ideally help their decision making. Of course, nowadays scores are so heavily inflated and confusing, since everyone seems to have their own little subsystem within the limits of the one the respective sites provide, that just looking at scores for one's decisions is a bad practice. Keeping that in mind, let's now finally find out which score to give an anime. At first, you have something fundamentally to decide. Do you want to rate anime in general, in absolute, or in relative terms? The former meaning you look at an anime pretty much in isolation, or as best as you can, and then decide what score it should get based on its own merits alone. The latter meaning that you have certain references. For example, you could rate an anime relative to the time when it was first released, because you think it would be unfair to compare it to modern times where things have color if you're looking to the movie side of things, or where anime got digitized and have more access to computer-generated special effects. Or you could compare the anime in question to an average baseline anime. The answer to how much better or worse it is will lead you to the score it deserves. Or, as a third option, you could rate it relative to its genre peers. Or, if you really cared about the humans behind making it work in the first place, you could create a score based on the amount of effort put into it, kind of like a difficulty factor in high diving. Of course, there's nothing preventing you from mixing them as you see fit. Just remember, stay consistent with it and don't just change the rules for certain anime or your whole system becomes unbelievable. The next question you are confronted with is, should you rate an anime as a whole or as the sum of its parts? There are many sites that let you rate specific components of a show like story, characters, animation and music, those being the most common ones. Say, if you just watched an anime, are using a 5-star rating system and gave all of these components 3 out of 5 stars, for example, should the anime in question also get 3 out of 5 stars? You know, taking the mean or median into consideration. This is something you'll have to decide for yourself too. Alright, so we've talked about the different rating systems used today, what things to consider for designing your own one, and I gave you some tips on how to score the anime you just watched. To put it all together, I'd like to demonstrate you my own personal rating system and how I got here. My rating adventures all began on a German anime site called praxer.me. It featured a 10-star system without half stars. My ratings back then were quite primitive and nonsensical. Being new to anime, I gave everything that I slightly enjoyed a 10 out of 10, anime with one big flaw or so that bugged me a bit got a 9, okay anime got an 8, and finally disappointing ones got a 7. Nothing lower existed for me, as I thought it to be impossible that I would ever watch an anime this bad, right? Anyway, sometime later I switched to my anime list as my list had grown to about 100 anime and they had some obscure entries that praxer.me didn't. I now had enough experience to admit to myself that some anime just aren't as good as I thought. I still remember the exact moment I realized what an average anime looked like when I was watching a show called 11 Eyes. It was the 6th episode or so when I thought to myself, wait a minute, this looks oddly familiar, have I seen all this before? and from this day on I actually included 5 and 6 into my system as well. Watching some more stuff, my average finally became a 7, which is pretty much the one most people on my anime list seem to have. Yep, mostly using the numbers 5 to 10 and having an average rating of about 7 is how the average small user operates. But yeah, watching a few hundred more anime, it became harder and harder to differentiate how I felt about certain anime. So eventually I started using the whole scale. Naturally, there were more good than bad scores, but this kind of balanced out after I had a short phase where I would watch every 40-something anime every season. Note, don't do that. And then over the years, after consuming more and more anime and also cartoons, live action stuff like movies, TV series and even reading books and not just manga, my taste has matured and I've continuously refined my personal rating system ever since. Even to the point that I've got an almost perfect normal distribution on my ratings, which I'm kind of proud of, not gonna lie. And that's not to say that you must have a textbook looking bell curve to have a good system in place. I just found it amusing that I've now had this statistical concept confirmed in my own practice. That's pretty funny. Anywho, now for the rating system that I actually use today and that hasn't changed in a significant way for like 3 years at this point. First and foremost, I use IMDb as my anime rating site of choice, so to say, since I'm also into all the other stuff it holds. It forces me into a 10-star rating system, which is fine for me as this has become my favorite one anyway. There was actually a time where I'd use a 100% system on a site called AnySearch, but even with loads of anime watched, the natural score fluctuations I felt over the span of only a few days all the time killed me and my perfectionism, so I jumped ship. I do use the whole spectrum obviously, with 5 being the score I hand out the most, and the further away from a 5, the bigger the decline in amount. I actually do believe that genres are just built different. Be it that some are more fundamentally interesting or educational, or require more effort to do well. For example, a psychological drama will be heavily favored score-wise in contrast to a, say, slice of life, cute girl doing cute things type of anime, even if they are, in the context of their respective genre, equally good. Some of my favorite genres include, well, psychological, drama, action, and thriller, while my least favorite include romance, mystery, sexuality specifics, and slice of life. These are my biases that I want to communicate to you. Next, I rate anime in absolute terms when it comes to time and in relative terms when it comes to comparing each other's overall quality. This means that if I were to review an old anime like the first Hunter x Hunter show, for example, I would rate it as if it just came out today. I don't care if its clichés weren't clichés back then, I would still count them as flaws nowadays. Because if you think about it, what is the biggest use case of ratings anyway? It's for other people to find good stuff to watch now. Who cares if it was good 30 years ago if it doesn't hold up? Then what's the point of recommending it to anyone other than historians for enjoyment? Like mentioned before, I also rate anime in relation to all other anime and also all other media in existence. Yep, in my list, anime are competing with live action shows and movies as well. Also notice that I don't compare anime of the same genre with each other in this sense. Just because something is the best mystery anime or whatever, doesn't make it a 10 in my eyes. On top of all that, I usually rate all seasons of a franchise all at once, and only make exceptions when the seasons are incredibly unique with not much of an overall ongoing story. Alright, now let's get to what each score actually means in my personal rating system. Let's start with the highest score and work our way down. To solve the perfect 10 conundrum, I have decided to only allow one single anime to be a perfect 10 out of 10. My favorite one. It doesn't matter how many flaws it has or how many I admit myself, this entry is basically under protection. It may very well be of a much lower score when looked at with a more critical eye, but I don't care. This is the only exception where let flaws slide. This also solves the problem of 10 obviously being the highest score in a 10-point rating system with no leeway at all, so one would think it has to be perfect with no flaws. But since I specifically define it as all potential flaws are thrown out, it kind of works out in my own quirky way of thinking. Now, a 9 holds the best entries a medium has to offer. The titles here are very likely to already be known by everybody, as my theory is that if an anime is really that exceptionally good, then it has been discovered already. There's no way around it. They may still have some flaws, but being the best doesn't mean flawless. It just means that they are better than everything else. They also require to be at least above average in all major areas, so story, characters, visuals, and soundtrack. By the way, this is also ordered in how much weight I apply to each component. And yeah, a title of this caliber is usually anime of the decade. So what does an 8 look like? Anime in this class are likely the best of their respective genres as well as the best of their respective release year, often even more. There might be 1 or 2 significant flaws that are holding this entry back from being a 9. Great premise with good execution or good premise with great execution. To be an 8, the title must include at least one of my preferred genres and contain the elusive certain something that resonates with me on a personal level and takes it above all the other only good entries. A perfect comedy would also get an 8, but not higher, because humor is too subjective in this sense. Now 8 plus is where I would consider myself a true fan of the work. A 7 means good. Like actually, really, truly good. Not it's kinda good, I guess. Most people would consider a 7 out of 10 merely okay, passable, or even average. But I don't. A 7 is an easy recommendation, certainly for fans of the genre, but usually for others as well. A 7 is a title you wanna watch when you've lost faith in the medium and need to be reminded that there's still the good stuff among all the trash out there. Usually this is also a contender for the best of the year. This is the highest score I can give entries of genres I don't like. There may be many bigger flaws in this one, but the positives still largely outweigh the negatives. Titles that belong here often have great execution, but not a particularly interesting premise or small scale to begin with, meaning their potential is already capped. Consistently funny titles live here as well. Now on to 6s. I like it. It doesn't do anything groundbreaking and it's not a universal recommendation, but it has enough things going for it that it's worthy to be consumed. This is not a must-experience title, but rather a I'm glad I found it title. Genre fans will still get enjoyment out of this, others might not be that interested. A 6 is already a contender for best of the season. This is also a good choice for a time waster if one has nothing better to do. Lots of stuff that I like but can't really wrap my head around what the fuck I'm watching also belongs here, like random mindfucks. Certainly above average and not immediately forgettable. With all that being said, a 6 may also be something that was quite disappointing and wasted its potential, or something with a great premise but lackluster execution. A 5 is where most titles belong. A 5 is just another entry in the medium. It may even be professionally and competently made with a big budget behind it, but there's nothing special about it. You feel like you have experienced this thing several times over already. There's not much I can say about 5s because there's not much to talk about in the first place. Inoffensive, average, mid, forgettable, sometimes hit or miss with many good elements and an equal amount of flaws. Everything also starts with this score. Now when I think about 4s, I think this is bad. I should have written my due essay instead rather than wasting time with this thing. I probably didn't even bother to finish this. There are many issues with this work and maybe one interesting thing that saves it from being completely terrible. Would even decline offers from friends and family on this one. This may even be considered the worst score in a sense that it's not only just bad as opposed to funny bad, but also highly forgettable. Now when you are a 3, then you have nothing to offer yet everything to take, like my precious time. 3s are terrible, awful, and if you're lucky, they fall into the category of so bad it's good. This is a train wreck that fails miserably at what it sets out to do. Fans of the genre will feel betrayed. A great example of what not to do. This is also a place where pretentious zero substance, all style entries belong. It can honestly be considered an art form in and of itself to produce something this bad. But with a 2, it stops being funny. There is no reason this should exist. Someone made a concerted effort to make this offensively bad, most likely to actively insult its audience or to cause real mental pain. 2s are the worst possible titles of the medium. To get lower, one would have to produce pure nothingness. The only reason one would want to watch a 2 is when they are eager to find out where the bottom truly lies. And hint, it's not Sword Art Online. Not even close. Similar to my 10, I consider a 1 the single worst entry of the medium, and one that I personally hate with a passion. This is the only time where I would identify myself as an actual hater of something. It's likely that this is even officially banned in some or all countries. And last and least, a 0. I actually considered a 0 in my scores as well, simply because there is the possibility of a black screen with nothing at all on it, or a PowerPoint slideshow made in 5 minutes presented as a consumable product. I do this because I want the true mean score to be reflected by 5 and not 5.5. This also gives more positive meaning to 6s rather than simply being slightly above average. And to wrap it all up, I always round down. So if something happens to be a 6.5 in my mind, it will always get a 6. And with all that being said, you should now have an idea of all the different rating systems that are in use today and how to create your own architecture that makes sense to you and your audience. For clarification, I've also shown you my very own personal way to rate anime as an extensive example. Now you are hopefully well equipped to choose the right score for any anime you could think of. And always remember, the most important part is consistency and not necessarily to keep as close as possible to a statistical bell curve. Some of you might even argue that such a curve surrounding the middle value of one system is quite unrealistic. After all, you are more likely to seek out genre-specific, interesting looking and promising anime in the first place, so the chance of it being an absolute train wreck should be relatively small, right? And I actually agree with this notion to some degree. If you really are only following this approach, then your average is probably a little higher than that. Say a 6 out of 10 for example. However, like mentioned before in this video, I also used to watch a lot of anime just for the heck of it. You know, merely because it was anime. And my perfectionism often leads me to finishing straight up bad shows, so I can give them the scores they deserve in my view. I've dropped this habit of mine for some time now however, and I'm already starting to notice my mean score rising again, albeit at a very slow pace. In any case, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave me a like. Do you have your own custom rating system in place? And how important are scores to you? Let me know in the comments. And finally, if you want to see more videos like this, you may want to subscribe. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next video.